Okay, picture this. It's August 1st, 2026, at an almost 100-year-old baseball stadium in Springfield, Illinois. It's a place most Americans may not be able to find on a map if you gave them 3 guesses. The front of the stadium looks like what you'd expect for a ballpark of her age, complete with a royal blue wooden press box straight out of the 1940s. But the inside is as modern a field as any. The grass is green and bright and mowed, and it contrasts with the brown dirt of the infield and the white of the bases. At the concession stands, you'll find classic baseball fare, popcorn, hot dogs, hamburgers, and some newer menu options, ribeye steak sandwiches and pork tenderloin. The seats and bleachers inside hold a little over 5,000 people. On the surface, it looks like your average, above average baseball stadium for maybe a small minor league team. But there's something unique that you'll only find on this field, at this stadium, and at this game. That's because on August 1st, in that stadium, Robin Roberts Stadium, the Women's Pro Baseball League will kick off their inaugural season. At 5 p.m., they'll throw the first pitch for a game between a team called the New York Heights and a team called the Boston Hunters. Neither team has ever set foot in a stadium in New York or Boston, and neither will this season at least. Alongside 2 other teams from Los Angeles and San Francisco, respectively, they will play each other over the course of several weeks, culminating in a championship game of 5. It's an incredible milestone for women's sports and for baseball, and for most of all, for the 120 players on the 4 teams. But this is not the first time a professional female baseball team or even league has been attempted in the U.S. 4 other women's pro baseball leagues existed before this one. One of them was made famous by that classic Tom Hanks and Gina Davis movie, and we're going to get into that. Another lasted about a month. Every single one of those 4 leagues had a first season that felt exactly like this one does right now. New ballparks, real press coverage, merchandise, fan hype, and women who'd waited their entire lives for precisely this moment. And every single one of them stopped existing. So why is this league, this attempt, different? Is it different? I think it is. And the WPBL is learning from those previous leagues and mistakes to ensure that this time, women's baseball sticks for decades to come. So in today's episode, I want to take you on a little trip down memory lane. I want to introduce you to the women of baseball whose names you may already know, and many you probably don't. I want to tell you about the history of women in baseball in this country, why those leagues failed, and what the WPBL is doing differently. And here's why you should pay attention to how this season plays out, because it goes beyond just liking baseball. Every one of those 4 leagues wasn't just a business that failed. It was a door that opened for a few hundred women and then closed again, often for decades at a stretch. If the WPBL doesn't make it either, which I really hope is not the case, that's not just a disappointing headline. That's the 6th time in under 100 years this opportunity slips through fingers. If it fails, there's no guarantee anyone tries this again before today's players are done playing. And if it fails, it means the pipeline for little girls to advance into the sport and the opportunities for others to become coaches and trainers and umpires at this professional level all the way down, that's all cut off. And there's a more immediate stake, too. For the 120 women on these rosters, this is their actual career right now for whatever this league turns out to be worth. Some of them built a decade or more of sideways, improvised paths just to get to this point, because there's never been a real path to walk. Whether this league sticks around decides whether the next version of these athletes get an easier path, or if they have to build the same workaround all over again. In more simple terms, if this league doesn't succeed, the chance of your town having an all-female baseball rec league gets smaller. The chance of girls getting a baseball scholarship to a university or a college, not a softball scholarship, becomes almost non-existent. It doesn't just end the careers of current players. It changes the game, literally, for players everywhere. So this first season isn't just a feel-good story. It is quite possibly the make or break moment for women in baseball. You ready to go on a road trip down baseball history? Let's go. There's no crying in baseball. Probably one of the most well-known movie quotes from the last 50 years. And where the history of women's professional baseball starts. Sort of. The very first women's baseball league was the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It ran from 1943 to 1954. It was started by Philip Wrigley of Wrigley Gum, and the same one who also owned the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field. And the goal was simple: keep ballparks full while the men's teams emptied out to serve during World War II. The league started with 4 founding teams, all clustered within a short drive of Chicago, Illinois: the Rockford Peaches, the Racine Bells, the Kenosha Comets, and the South Bend Blue Sox. Over 600 women played across those 12 seasons, wearing names like the Fort Wayne Daisies, the Kalamazoo Lassies, and the Milwaukee Chicks. Names that, on their own, tell you a lot about how the league wanted these women to be perceived. The league gets credited a lot with drawing 900,000 fans in its peak year, 1948. And that number is technically true, but it's a little misleading. By then, the league had grown to 10 teams, so actual per-game attendance was closer to about 700 people. Respectable, just not the sea of fans that headline numbers implied. Most people are familiar with this league, even a little, because of the hit 1992 movie A League of Their Own, starring Tom Hanks and Gina Davis. Despite it being full of actors, the baseball in that movie is very real. The cast trained roughly 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, for about 7 months before filming began. Director Penny Marshall had them play actual full games with multiple cameras rolling to capture footage. None of the bumps and bruises you see were fake. If you remember that one famous scene that shows a crazy bruise on backup catcher Alice Gasper's thigh, that was real. Actress Renee Coleman, who played Alice, said that bruise took over a year to fully heal. Several real AAGBPL alumni worked on the film as well as consultants and appeared as extras in that Cooperstown scene. And like the movie portrayed, this wasn't just a baseball league. It came with an entire enforced image. Every player was required to attend nightly charm school during spring training, teaching them how to walk, sit, apply makeup, and get in and out of a car like a lady. The league's own president, a former big leaguer named Max Carey, said it outright. "Femininity is the keynote of our league," he said. "No pants-wearing, tough-talking female softballer will play on any of our 4 teams." And that uniform itself, you may remember it from the movie, a short, flared skirt, no pants allowed, wasn't just old-fashioned. Dottie Kamenchek, the league's best hitter and the player Gina Davis's character was modeled after, said flatly that skirt made every ground ball an ordeal because you'd stoop down and the fabric would just be there. Sliding into a base in that skirt tore your thighs open. Players called the resulting scrapes strawberries, and they rarely healed before the next game. So what actually killed the league? It wasn't one thing, but several things landing at once, right around 1950. The men's teams, which had thinned out during the war, started refilling with returning veterans. Television started putting men's baseball into people's living rooms for free. The men's teams and the AAGBPL started having to compete for the same and limited sports dollar. And the league's own ownership structure changed. Instead of one central office handling marketing and recruitment across every team, individual owners bought in and started running their own shows. Basically, all the teams were being run independently with no real common oversight. Here's a small example of how bad that got. In 1951, the league president asked every team to send in basic publicity materials ahead of the season. Only one team bothered to respond. Attendance and revenue dropped drastically after that, and teams began to shut down. By 1954, there were only 5 teams left, and the whole thing quietly closed soon after. Today, there are only a handful of women still alive that played for the AAGBPL, the most active of which may be Maybelle Blair. She is currently 99 years old, and she pitched for the Peoria Red Wings during the 1948 season. Madonna's character in the movie was loosely based on Maybelle, and you'll still find Maybelle on social media, at the ballpark, taking in a game, and even throwing out the occasional first pitch. The second attempt at a women's baseball league was the National Girls Baseball League. It ran almost concurrently to the AAGBPL from 1944 to 1954, but unlike the former, this league never left Chicago. The league was founded more or less out of spite by an Illinois contractor named Emery Perici and Charles Bidwell, who owned the NFL's Chicago Cardinals. See, when Wrigley started signing Chicago's best amateur softball players into the AAGBPL in 1943, he didn't really bother looping in the local team owners who'd been running the softball scene for years. Perici, who'd already built his own ballpark to showcase women's softball, was annoyed enough to start his own league with 6 teams like the Music Maids, the Bloomer Girls, and the Queens. And this wasn't a polite parallel league. It was a genuine long feud. The two leagues never actually played each other on the field, but they spent years raiding each other's rosters with better pay and shorter road trips. It got competitive enough that in 1946, the two sides had to sign an actual non-raiding pact just to stop stealing each other's talent. The NGBL also stuck with fast-pitch underhand softball for its entire run. It never migrated toward real overhand baseball the way the AAGBPL slowly did. And it still drew nearly 600,000 fans a year by 1948, numbers that occasionally rivaled its far more famous sibling league. But here's something the NGBL did that the AAGBPL should have done. The NGBL was meaningfully more integrated. See, the AAGBPL never signed a single black player across its entire 12-year run. The NGBL had Betty Chapman, a black outfielder, on its roster by 1951. It also had a Chinese-American pitcher named Gwen Wong and a Japanese-American shortstop named Nancy Ito, all who made the league's all-star team in 1953. After the 1952 season, Jesse Owens, yes, that Jesse Owens, showed up in person to present the league's MVP award to a player named Dolores Moore. Despite its initial success, the league never had the reach of the AAGBPL, at least beyond Chicago, and it folded for basically the same underlying reasons at basically the same time: rising television competition and failing attendance with a fraction of the coverage. But you can argue that the success of the AAGBPL came, in part, because of the success of this league and the barriers it broke for women who just wanted to play ball. Next came the International Girls Baseball League, which ran from the winter of 1952 into 53. This one is a case study in bad timing, and I mean that. The idea had been floating around since 1948 when the AAGBPL's own commissioner at the time dreamed up a barnstorming winter circuit that would play in Florida in December, then Venezuela in January, Puerto Rico in February, and Cuba in March. That version never got off the ground. But what did launch in 1952 was a scaled-down version organized by the administrators from the NGBL, the rival league we just talked about. Organizers pulled players from both the AAGBPL and the National Girls Baseball League and built 4 brand new teams: the Fort Lauderdale Rockettes, the Hollywood Queens, the Miami Maids, and the Miami Beach Bells, all to play a winter season in South Florida. Sounds pretty standard, right? But here's a detail that tells you everything about how unrealistic this was. The original schedule called for 240 games. That's on top of the regular seasons those same women would go back and play in the spring. Opening day in 1952 drew about 660 fans. Games afterward drew as few as 200, and players were soon asked to take pay cuts to keep the whole thing afloat. The league broke for Christmas that year, came back on January 6th, and by January 11th, after about 6 weeks, it was announced that the rest of the season was canceled. A Chicago sports writer had predicted the collapse in print days before Christmas, saying the league was doomed without a lusty TV contract. Sound familiar? He was right, and it didn't take long to prove it. The next iteration doesn't technically count on the list of 4 failed leagues because it wasn't a league, but like those leagues before it paved the road a bit farther for women in the sport. The Colorado Silver Bullets ran from 1994 to 1997. And like I said, they weren't a league at all. But there was no other women's team for them to play, so they barnstormed against men. The idea actually started a full decade before it ever hit the field. A former Atlanta Braves public relations executive named Bob Hope, not that Bob Hope, had been pitching the concept of a women's pro baseball team since 1984. but it took him until 1994 to get it funded by the Coors Brewing Company, to the tune of about $8 million across 4 years. 27 women were chosen out of over 1,300 who tried out, and they spent 4 seasons playing men's semi-pro, college, and amateur teams all over the U.S. because there was no women's league left standing to play instead. Their first game on Mother's Day, 1994, they lost 9-0, and they finished that first season with only 6 wins. And yet, people showed up anyway. 250,000 fans paid to watch them play that year, an average of nearly 5,700 a game. And one single game at Coors Field in Denver drew almost 28,000 people. The novelty was the idea of women playing against men, and it actually worked, for a while at least, as a real draw. The team kept getting better every season, too, which helped. 11 wins, then 18, then a winning record in their 4th and final year. Despite that initial success, it too failed, and 2 things did it. First, the novelty wore off. By 96 and 97, attendance had nosedived pretty hard because watch women play men kind of stops being a draw once people have already seen it a few times and know roughly how it goes. In that final season, none of their games were even televised. Second, and much more simply, Coors decided not to renew the sponsorship after 1997, and there was no backup plan. Despite 4 straight years of real, measurable improvement on the field, the team folded the moment its one sponsor walked away. And while this isn't named as a reason for the team ending, for 4 seasons, a team with Colorado stitched across every single jersey played a grand total of 2 games in the actual state of Colorado. The travel was hard, the team had no real home, and eventually, it cost more to keep it going than it did to walk away. The most recent attempt is the one that stings the most because it had genuine tailwind behind it. The Ladies League Baseball ran in 1997 and 1998. Founded by a San Diego businessman, it launched 5 years after A League of Their Own hit theaters, and it was riding that real, renewed public interest in women's baseball. It consisted of 5 teams in that first year: the San Jose Spitfire, the San Francisco Bayhawks, the Long Beach Aces, the Phoenix Peppers, the Los Angeles Legends. Unfortunately, they had problems attracting attention and fans from the get-go, and the Long Beach Aces folded after the first season when they couldn't fill the stands in their stadium. In year 2, the league renamed itself the Ladies Professional Baseball League and tried to expand fast. It added new teams in Buffalo, New York, and Augusta, New Jersey, and it relocated the Los Angeles team all the way to Homestead, Florida. The problem with that expansion is, for whatever reason, they targeted markets with zero built-in audience for the sport in one single offseason. The 1998 season was supposed to run 56 games. It made it through 16 before ownership canceled the rest. Not purely because of empty seats, either. Reporting at the time cited a combination of low attendance, rising insurance costs, and high stadium rental fees, all hitting at once. Sometimes a league doesn't just lose its audience, it loses the math of running the business at the exact same time. So, 4 failed leagues and 1 failed team across 80 years. 4 similar and different causes of death: fragmented ownership, vanished promotion, no reach beyond one city, a schedule nobody thought through, and reckless expansion into markets with no fans and no financial cushion. The silver bullets add a 5th lesson on top of all of that, even though they weren't technically a league: a sponsor-dependent novelty act that eventually wears off. Zoom out, though, and every one of these 5 stories shares the exact same underlying thing. None of them ever actually solved the money. And as cold as it sounds, sports is a business, and it needs money to survive. All these leagues existed before social media, even the internet, so the only way to bring in money was through ticket sales, through sponsorships, and merchandise. And those are finicky factors that ebb and flow even in the men's big leagues and even today. So, does the WPBL look like it's fixed any of that? Or has it just fixed one thing while walking straight into another? Before we analyze if the Women's Pro Baseball League is destined to be the league, let's start with who and what they are. The league was co-founded by Justine Siegel and Keith Stein. And for Siegel, this isn't some overnight idea for her. She has been building toward this for close to 3 decades. She was 13 the first time a coach told her, flat out, that girls shouldn't play baseball. Good news, she didn't listen. Back in 2010, she founded a nonprofit called Baseball for All, entirely built around getting girls onto actual baseball diamonds instead of rerouting them to softball. And in 2015, she became the first woman to ever coach a major league organization with the Oakland A's. The WPBL isn't a side project or side quest for her. It's the last item on a list she's been checking off her whole career. Her co-founder, Keith Steen, is a Toronto lawyer who owns a men's semi-pro team called the Toronto Maple Leafs and something called the Intercounty Baseball League. Now, the teams. There are 4 of them, each named for a woman connected to that team's home city. The New York Heights, after civil rights leader Dorothy Height. The San Francisco Fireballs, after Lily Hitchcock Coit, a 19th century patron of volunteer firefighters. The Los Angeles Queens, after Lizzie Murphy, a barnstorming player from the early 1900s who went by Queen of the Diamond. And the Boston Hunters, after 19th century physician and activist Harriet Hunt. Over 600 women from 10 countries showed up to open tryouts at Nationals Park in August of last year. About 1 in 5 of them made it into the draft pool, which happened earlier this year. Kelsey Whitmore went first overall, which wasn't a surprise. She may be one of the most well-known female baseball players right now. She played high school baseball in Temecula, California, where she was the only girl on the team. She received a full softball scholarship to Cal State Fullerton because that was simply the only path that existed if she wanted to keep playing at a high level. At age 18, she signed with the Sonoma Stompers, an independent men's league team, and became one of only 2 women ever to play in the same men's league at the same time. In 2022, she became the first woman to start a game in the Atlantic League, which is an official MLB partner league, meaning she is, technically, the first woman ever to sign a contract inside actual organized baseball. Then, in 2025, she signed with the Savannah Bananas. You may know that from their social media. And she pitched in 8 different major league stadiums in one summer. So the number 1 draft pick was a woman who has spent her entire adult life inventing a career path that did not previously exist. Pick number 2 in the draft was Ayami Sato, a Japanese pitcher. She won 6 straight Women's Baseball World Cup titles for Japan and 3 consecutive tournament MVP awards, which nobody else has ever done more than once. In the 2018 championship game against the U.S., she threw a complete game shutout on 88 pitches and didn't let a single American runner reach third base. Her fastball's been clocked near 80 miles an hour, and her curveball's been compared to Clayton Kershaw's. And months before this draft, Ayami became the first woman to ever play in Canada's Intercounty Baseball League for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Stein's team. The 10th pick was Monet Davis, and you may remember her. In 2014, at 13 years old, she became the first girl to pitch a shutout in the Little League World Series history. And then she did the thing almost every talented American girl who plays baseball eventually has to do. She moved to softball because there's no path forward in baseball. This draft is the first time in over 5 years she's played competitive baseball again. And her story isn't really a comeback story. It's closer to a return from exile story, and the exile was not her choice. Now, there will be some differences in how the games are actually played compared to an MLB game. First, the women will play 7 innings instead of 9. They'll use aluminum bats, and they have 15-player rosters. Each team will play 2 or 3 games a week, all Thursday through Sunday. And remember our opening? Every single 2026 game, all 4 teams, the entire regular season, the entire playoffs, happens at Robin Roberts Stadium in Springfield. There is no Boston Stadium, no New York Stadium. Stein's public explanation given to Front Office Sports was that decision was about geography and broad appeal, wanting a home base in the middle of the country instead of picking a coast. I think that's true, and I also think that running one stadium in year 1 is dramatically simpler and cheaper than standing up 4 of them. There's also a history in this location, and maybe that has something to do with it too. Springfield hosted one of the first documented women's professional baseball games in American history, all the way back in 1875. It was a novelty match between 2 barnstorming outfits called the Blondes and the Brunettes. I do not know if their hair color matched their titles. Decades later, The AAGBPL added a Springfield team in the 1940s called the Springfield Sallies. Unfortunately, they were the worst team in the entire league, so they folded after a single season. But Springfield has hosted both one of women's baseball's biggest early moments and one of its failures. This new league is betting on repeating the first one. Now, the money. Each team is running on a $95,000 total salary budget for 15 players. That works out to about $6,000 a player across a 6-week regular season, so about $1,000 a week. Pay is set by draft position, too, not performance. So a player's paycheck was basically decided the second her name got called, and not by anything she does once the games start. Housing is covered during the season, and the players do get an unspecified cut of sponsorship revenue. There's already a broadcast deal in place with a production company called Fremantle, but it's better known in this country for game shows than sports coverage. But it's a start. And one final piece of context, just for comparison, but I think it's important to note. While it goes without saying that the U.S. struggles to stand up and keep a women's professional baseball league, we are in the minority in that. Japan has won 7 straight women's baseball World Cups, dating back to 2008. And they sit number 1 in the current world rankings. Canada is number 2. Chinese Taipei is number 3. Venezuela just moved into 4th. The United States, the country that invented this sport, is ranked 5th. And it only won the first 2 World Cups back in 2004 and 2006. Australia, South Korea, and Cuba round out the next tier behind that, all with real national programs of their own. And newer entrants like Mexico, the Philippines, and Great Britain are just starting to build theirs. Japan is the model, too, in my opinion. They have 23,000 women playing organized baseball across 102 women's teams, a number that's grown by 40 teams in the last decade alone. The U.S., meanwhile, has no formal women's baseball program at any level. Not one state even offers it as a high school sport. So knowing all this, will the WPBL succeed? Let's find out. So what killed each of the leagues before? And what is the WPBL doing differently right now? First, fragmented ownership was the main thing that killed the AAGBPL, once individual teams took control. Remember that detail, the league president asking every team for basic publicity ahead of the season and only one team bothered to respond? That's what decentralization looks like in practice. Nobody in charge of making sure the lights stay on. The good news is the WPBL doesn't have that structural problem. Siegel and Stein own the entire league outright. There's no second tier of team owners. And that's a real fix. And it's worth remembering that this is exactly how the AAGBPL ran during its best years, back when Wrigley ran the whole operation centrally. Second, bad scheduling killed the International Girls League. That league tried to squeeze a 240-game winter schedule into South Florida, competing against bowl games and Greyhound racetracks, and it collapsed. The WPBL runs a tight window, August through mid-September. One real season, no attempt to double up player schedules the way the IGL did. It's also happening at a time when, for the majority of its season, it's not fighting for attention outside of MLB games. There's no football, no holidays, no Olympics. The bar is lower, but sometimes you have to start lower and grow up. Novelty, plus a single sponsor, killed the silver bullets. Remember, the team's tire draw was watch women beat, or at least play, men. A genuinely fun idea for, a season or two. And then a ceiling. By the final year, none of their games were even televised. And one bad sponsor renewal conversation with Coors ended 4 years of steady on-field improvement basically overnight. The WPBL isn't selling that same novelty. And it's not riding on one company's goodwill. Funding is spread across a broadcast deal with Fremantle, and the league is partnered with major brands like Dick's Sporting Goods and New Era. That said, a $95,000 total team payroll is obviously less secure than an $8 million 4-year commitment from Coors in 1994. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. Yes, it's a thinner budget right now. But if they can make it work, it also means they know, going into future seasons, the bare minimum they need to bring in. And it's not a lot. Reckless expansion killed the Ladies League Baseball. This is where the neutral site setup is interesting because it solves the opposite version of the same problem by avoiding it entirely. Remember, that league's actual collapse wasn't only about empty seats. It was low attendance, insurance costs, and high stadium rents. All landing at the same time in the same season, right as they tried to add cities that had never seen the sport. The WPBL isn't expanding into unproven markets at all right now. Everybody plays in one stadium, there's one set of stadium costs, and one insurance policy. Nobody has to build a fan base in a new city, and Springfield has a history of women's pro ball, so it has a better chance of surviving there, at least to begin with, than a town that doesn't. That said, this problem is merely deferred. It's not solved. Stein has plans to add 2 more teams in 2027, bringing the league to 6, with the 4 coastal cities finally getting real home games in their own markets that year. The league's also running barnstorming exhibition games in those 4 cities during this current season, basically test driving the exact markets it plans to activate next year. And notably, exactly the kind of soft launch step the Ladies League Baseball skipped entirely before it jumped straight into Buffalo and Augusta. So the real test of the Ladies League Baseball lesson hasn't happened yet, and that's something to pay attention to. Can the WPBL show up in cities that have never watched it play, with real rent and real insurance costs, and find out if anyone actually comes? And then, finally, there's the money. The one thing every single one of these 4 leagues and the Silver Bullets eventually lost to. It's true that WPBL is running lean right now. It is not obviously more sustainable than what any of these 4 previous leagues started with, because every single one of them looked survivable in year 1 too, right up until it wasn't. But what's genuinely new this time is the demand data sitting behind it. A Hart research poll from spring 2025 found stated interest in the WPBL running about even with the WNBA and NCAA women's college basketball. So that was real measured interest before anything formally kicked off with the league. None of the 4 prior leagues had anything like that walking in the door. Whether that interest converts into attendance and sponsorship dollars that cover payroll is the one thing nobody, including the league itself, has an answer to yet. There's also a new factor none of the 5 prior attempts had: an international talent pipeline. Every one of the 4 original leagues was built entirely on American talent. The WPBL has that, of course. Whitmore's whole career is a monument to the talent that resides on sandlots and fields across the country. But it also has women like Ayami Sato, walking in from a country with 102 women's teams and a real pipeline behind her. And it's not a fix, but a genuinely new ingredient no other league had. And it's part of why the on-field product this year should be better than any prior attempts right out of the gate. So do I think the WPBL will succeed? I do. And it's not just because I really want it to. 3 of the 4 specific things that killed the leagues before this look meaningfully addressed on paper. And the Silver Bullets added lesson, that novelty in a single sponsor, looks addressed too. The one thing that isn't is one we simply can't know right now: whether the underlying economics hold once the season's novelty wears off. Because we must expect some of the novelty to wear off. And when it does, we can't let that be a sign that the entire operation should be canned. So here are the 3 things I'm paying attention to this season to see what the future holds for this league. First, whether those 2 2027 expansion teams get officially named and located on a schedule. Second, whether the barnstorming games in the 4 home cities this season draw real crowds, not just curiosity. And third, whether that Fremantle broadcast deal turns into an actual number anyone reports, a rating, a stream count, anything at all. Because remember, the last time a league in this story went a full season without a single televised game, that was also its last season. So those 3 things, more than any opening day headline, are going to tell you whether this becomes the 5th failure or the first real success. Every one of the 4 leagues before this made it further than people expected, and every single one still ended. That's not a reason to write this one off. If anything, it's a reason to tune in to this season, support the teams, and start making women's baseball as common as men's. And if you want to support the teams, you should. And here's how. Don't confuse exposure with financial stability. By all means, follow the league and the teams on social media. They have great posts. Tune in when the games are broadcast live for free on the WPBL YouTube channel. But what helps, honestly, right now, and yes, in this economy, is buying a ticket to a game, if you can and if you're local, or buying merchandise and gear online. A quick Google search will give you all the info you need to do any of that and more. There's no question whether women's baseball belongs in the U.S. There was never a question of whether this league would launch. The biggest challenge facing the league today isn't making it happen, it's making it last. And we won't have a real answer to that for a while, until we know for sure if 4 cities that have only ever heard about these teams actually show up for them. For now, pick your favorite team. I'm torn between San Francisco and Boston, personally. And tune in on August 1st for the first pitch at 5 p.m. It's going to be historic. Thanks for spending time with us in the middle. If today's story caught your attention, drop a subscribe, share the episode, follow us on social media, and remember, it ain't over till it's over.